Something strange happens every time a trend goes viral. Everyone suddenly starts doing the same thing, the same dance, the same challenge, the same hype.
But there's always one person who just stands there, watching, not impressed, not curious, just uninterested. So the real question is, why do some people seem almost immune to trends? Psychology actually has a fascinating answer. At first glance, ignoring trends might look like stubbornness, or maybe social disconnection. But in reality, it often reveals something deeper about how a person's mind works. Because following trends is not just about entertainment, it's about how we make decisions, how we search for validation, and how we define our identity. Interestingly, people who rarely follow trends often share a few psychological traits that make them think very differently from the average person. Traits that might make them appear detached, but may actually reveal a much stronger mental independence. Internal locus of control. The first concept psychologists talk about is called locus of control. It describes where people believe the control of their life comes from.
Some people have an external locus of control. This means their decisions are heavily influenced by outside forces, what other people think, what society expects, what's currently trending. If everyone suddenly starts doing something, it sends a powerful signal. Maybe I should do that too. But people who ignore trends often fall into the second category. They have a strong internal locus of control. Instead of asking, what is everyone else doing? They ask, what actually makes sense to me? Their decisions are guided by personal values rather than social approval. Psychologist Julian Rotter, who introduced this concept, found that people with a strong internal locus of control are far more resistant to social pressure. They don't rely on external validation to feel confident in their choices. It's like having an internal compass that stays steady, even when the entire crowd suddenly changes direction. The second factor is something called cognitive bandwidth. Think of your brain like a smartphone battery. Every trend you follow is like an app running in the background. One trend, then another, then another. Each one consumes attention, energy, mental space. People who constantly chase trends often feel mentally exhausted without even realizing why. But people who naturally ignore trends often have a built-in filter. Before engaging with something new, their brain quietly asks, is this really worth my energy? If the answer is no, they move on. Instead of spending hours keeping up with internet noise, they invest that mental energy somewhere else, learning a new skill, reading, thinking deeply, or spending quality time with people they care about. 3. High need for cognition. Another psychological factor is called need for cognition, or NFC. This refers to how much someone enjoys thinking deeply about information. Some people naturally prefer to analyze things instead of simply accepting them. Before jumping onto a trend, they instinctively ask, what's the purpose of this? Does this actually add value to my life? Or is it just noise? Research from Ohio State University shows that individuals with a high need for cognition are far less influenced by flashy marketing or viral hype. Their brain naturally searches for substance instead of stimulation. So when something suddenly becomes popular, their first reaction is not excitement, it's curiosity. They want to understand it first, and if it turns out to be meaningless, they simply ignore it. Finally, it often comes down to identity. Many people use trends as a shortcut to belonging, wearing the same clothes, buying the same products, following the same content. These behaviors send a signal, I belong to this group. And there's nothing wrong with that. Humans are social creatures. But people who have a strong internal identity foundation don't rely on trends to define who they are. They already know their values, their interests, their direction in life. Because their identity isn't built on what's popular, it's built on what's meaningful to them. So when a new trend appears, it simply doesn't feel necessary. So if you're someone who rarely follows trends, it might not mean you're disconnected. It might actually mean something else entirely. It might mean you have a strong internal compass, a natural filter for what deserves your attention, and a clearer sense of who you are.
In a world where everyone is constantly chasing the next viral thing, that kind of mental independence is rare because trends move fast, but self-awareness moves deeper.
And the people who learn to think independently often end up building lives that feel far more authentic.
So if you've ever felt like the odd one out for not following the crowd, maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe it's a sign that your mind simply values something different. Not noise, but meaning. And sometimes, that difference is exactly what sets you apart.